Hey YouTube, today I'm going to go over the history and specs and everything about the Oliver OC-6. So here's our Oliver OC-6. OC stands for Oliver Crawler, and six-cylinder engine, also 6 version, because there's OC3, OC4. So Oliver purchased Cletrac on October 31st, 1944. Originally called the Cleveland Motor Plow Company, they changed their name to the Cleveland Tractor Company in June of 1917. After purchasing Cletrac, it took a long time for Oliver to get their first crawler designed and built. Issues with tooling costs, overall price, a 6-month strike, and personnel at Cletrac simply not liking the idea of a farm equipment company taking over a construction equipment company. They felt as though they were better, and so some employees moved elsewhere. Some to Cletrac. Cletrac was owned by ATC, American Tractor Corporation, but was bought by Case in 1957. It was originally planned to build an ag model and an industrial model. The ag model would be the OC-6, and an industrial model would be heavier and known as the OC-9. Both would use the same engine and tranny, but the industrial model would have a more rugged track frame and spring suspension. The industrial model never got past a prototype, and it was decided that the OC-6 would strictly be an ag model. The OC-6 came out in 1953 and replaced the Cletrac Model E. And you'll see the picture on the screen. There was an older E that had more squared off sheet metal. A hood looked like a barn roof, and a newer streamlined model. The picture on the left is the old version, and the pic on the right is the newer one. The OC-6 was Oliver's first all-new crawler model since 1944. The OC-6 was powered by the same Waukesha 6-cylinder gas or diesel as the Oliver 77 wheel tractor. Even though the OC-6 was mostly produced during the super era of tractors, it used the regular 77 engine until 1959, when the gas model OC-6 got the super engine, but the diesel remained a standard engine to the end of production. You gotta wonder why they didn't put the super diesel in it as well. I don't know the answer to that. Gas and diesel engines had a 3 5/16 bore by 3 3/4 stroke and a 1600 RPM operating speed. The super engine in the late OC-6 gas had a 3.5-inch bore by 3 3/4 with the same 1600 operating speed, so it's 3/16 bigger bore. 6 volt was standard on the gas, 12 volt was standard on the diesel. The transmissions on these used Oliver 88 gears to hold up to the greater loads of a crawler. The OC-6 had 6 forward speeds and 2 reverse, like the wheel tractors had. Speeds ranged from 1.88 miles per hour to nearly 9 miles an hour. Reverse was 1.92 and 3.31. Later, a lockout block was available to eliminate 6th gear, as Oliver felt it was too fast for a crawler. The first OC-6s built in 1953 had 2.5 inches more ground clearance than the later ones. An optional high clearance roll crop crawler was offered. It consisted of the final drive housings turned straight down and arched front guide supports that gave 6 inches more clearance. So this would have been arched here on those models. So this one must not be. There were also high crop models with 18 inches of extra clearance that were built in Florida. The bottom rollers were the same as the OC-3, except axles were longer. So the rollers down there. The tracks were the same as the OC-3, except they each had 3 more links. Track shoes were available from 8 inches wide to 36 inches wide. So this one is This one is a 14 wide. There were 4 gauge widths for the OC-6, 32 inches, 42, 60, and 68 on centers. It had 20 inches of row crop clearance except for the 32 gauge model. This one was lower for better stability. So this one, let's measure it once. That'll be pretty close to here. So this one's a 68. Pretty close to the center of it. List price for a 1956 basic OC-6 gas with 8-inch tracks was $3,681. The OC-6 was the only all-over crawler with a continuous live power takeoff. A standard Fleetline PTO unit was used with a shorter input shaft. So right here, it's like the same as a Fleetline. So you got independent with this lever here. And here's the PTO. The OC-6 featured controlled differential steering. So these 2 levers here. Both tracks would keep pulling all the time. The operator would never have to brake, declutch, or disconnect the inside track while turning. Oliver claimed the OC-6 was so easy to handle, the farmer could learn to drive it in 5 minutes. I could see that pretty easily. An Oliver Fleetline hydraulic unit was mounted on top of the transmission case, providing live hydraulics. So that would be here. It never made use of the hydroelectric feature. It was always controlled by manual levers. The first hydraulic units had the control levers on the side of the reservoir. So they'd be like here. There'd be levers like here. In 1954, with the super wheel tractors, a newer Series 3 hydraulic unit was used with levers coming out of the top of the unit. So this one's only got 1 lever. So I don't know, it must be, and this one looks like it's blocked off. There were 3 different seat styles. This is actually an easy way to figure out what year it is approximately. The first was the towards elastic seat used in 1953 and 54 only. So that's this one. There's a rubber thing in here that makes it cushion. It was quite comfortable but notorious for ejecting the operator in rough terrain. So if you got somebody that you don't like, you put them on that seat and they get catapulted. The second seat design was the Bostrom seat that was used on Oliver 77 and 88 tractors. It was like the Ridemaster style with 2 seat rubbers. I'll put pictures of these seats for you to see. That is found online. And the third seat was a 1955, an upholstered box type seat that kept the operator from moving around as much as the first 2 versions did. There were 2 styles of 3-point hitch options. Now this one doesn't have a 3-point hitch, but it would be back here. The early had a U-shaped bar that straddled the PTO. The late had a top link bracket fastened to a tube on the rock shaft. This version used a standard top link. A special drawbar was used on 3-point models, as a standard drawbar could not be used. It is very hard to find an OC-6 with a 3-point, as it did not perform well on a crawler. I think I read that they had issues with draft control, because with tracks it's different and it's hard to get that all set right. All OC-6s were painted industrial yellow, which was standard in Cleveland. So this would be like original paint, and it's yellow, how it's supposed to be. The OC-6 could have a 657 QD front mounted cultivator as optional equipment. The OC-6 was considered a 3-plow crawler. Loaders. You could get loaders later on these. Oliver made it very clear that the warranty would be voided if anyone put a dozer or loader on the OC-6, as it was intended as a farm crawler. Later on, they approved several loaders and dozers. I'm sure the customers had a lot to do with that, probably telling Oliver that they wanted to put stuff on. And there was no belt horsepower tested at Nebraska. If it had been, it would be similar to the 77 wheel tractors at 37.17 horse, 32.99 drawbar horsepower, so 33 max load for the gas, and 34.74 for diesel. An OC4 and OC-46 would outwork an OC-6 with less horsepower because it was an industrial crawler. So the OC-46, would, being a smaller crawler, would outwork this one in an industrial setting. The OC-6 was discontinued in 1960 when White took over Oliver. So the OC-6 was built for 8 years, 1953 to 1960. Here's a fun little fact. No other crawler had as much horsepower and such a lightweight package as the OC-6. To this day, farmers are still using the OC-6, especially in Wisconsin, to harvest sphagnum moss out of swamps. They still use it because there was never a replacement for it. Serial numbers, similar to the wheel tractors. The 53 started with 35 and the 54 started with 45. So this one is a 350 3890, so it's a 53 model. And in 1955 to 58 they went to 1 RM numbers, and 59 to 60 they were 2 RM numbers, which would be the start of the serial number. So they changed them in 1955. Here's your throttle, and then here's where you shift it. You steer. This stops or brakes to left, and then this brakes to right. Then you have an actual clutch right here, the starter push button, your same switch as the Fleetlines had with the lights over here, and the ignition was the first one. Gauges, choke. There would be a panel here. This would be how this would be. Kind of similar to the Super style with the open curtains. There's the air cleaner. Ran it up there, and then a pipe going down. And the starter. I use the same grills as the Fleetlines. You can see that big 6-cylinder in here. Same engine as the 77, but the clutch housing is different. This is like just a shield, and then the clutch you can see right here, and then the battery, of course. So just a neat thing, and it's definitely cool because it relates to the wheel tractor so much.